welcome everybody. My presentation will be in intercultural communication. It's not an easy subject. Like we can spend the whole day speaking about it, of course, but I had to condense it. I wanted to speak a little bit about the theorists who started this, working in this field, especially Edward T. Hall, who was one of the first practitioners of this field. However, I think it's also important to just speak about intercultural communication and give some definitions and clear it a little bit. Of course, any member of the audience can give me a definition of intercultural communication, but I think it's also important to speak a little bit about the paradigms of it and to just take note of this human feeling that is actually the main thing that will help enhance intercultural communication. Of course, it's an organic thing, not a mechanic, but also a mechanic follow-up to this field is important so you can enhance it and empower it. So, in the definition, thank you. Intercultural communication takes place when individuals influenced by different cultural communities negotiate shared meanings in interaction. So, what counts as intercultural communication depends in part on what one considers culture, and the definition of culture itself is quite contestable. Some authorities limit the term intercultural communication to refer only to communication among individuals from different nationalities. Others authorities, in contrast, they expand the notion of intercultural communication to encompass inter-ethnic, inter-religious, and even inter-regional communication, as well as communication among individuals from different sexual orientations. In this sense, all interactions can be arrayed along some continuum of interculturalness. Interactions are most highly intercultural when different individuals from different group identities are most salient in determining the values, prejudice, language, nonverbal behaviors, and relational styles upon which those individuals draw. To the degree that interactants are drawing more on personal values, personality traits, than intercultural. So when individuals from different cultural backgrounds become more intimate, their interaction typically move along the continuum from more intercultural to more interpersonal, though intercultural elements may always play a role. So for sometimes casual business or like casual or business communication, sensitivity to intercultural factors is sometimes a key to success. So communication and group identity. We have traditional theories of group identity recognizes two types of groups. We have the ascribed identity, which is the set of demographic and role descriptions that others in an interaction assume to hold true for you. So it's often a function of one's physical appearance, ethnic connotations of one's name, or other stereotypical associations. You have also the avowed identity, which is comprised of the group affiliation that one feels more intensely. So for example, if an individual is assimilated into a new culture, then the values and practices of that destination culture will figure importantly in her avowed culture. A related concept is a reference group. So a reference group is a social entity for which one draws one avowed identity. It is a group in which one feels competent and at ease. So ascribed and avowed identity are important for understanding intercultural communication because a person from another culture usually communicates with you based on your ascribed identity. That is how you are being perceived by that other person. But sometimes your avowed identity, the groups which you really feel a sense of comfort and affiliation, diverges from that ascribed identity. In such cases, the interaction is bound to be sometimes frustrating for both parties or the opposite. So recently, many identity theories have moved toward a communication theory of identity, which, according to this perspective, your cultural group membership is not a static label. Cultural identities are enacted or performed through interaction. So interaction here plays an important role, and it is done by communication. Therefore, therefore, it is important to also control your communication skills and enhance them. And it goes both ways. One other problem is, I think it's important to speak about, is culture shock and adaptation, which is one of the biggest problems that confronts intercultural communication. Because like cultural shock is a common stress reaction that individuals have when they find themselves immersed in an unfamiliar culture. So one sense of identity as a mature and efficient adult sometimes can be severely challenged when you cannot even pay for you don't know how to pay for the bus fare when you're in the airport, or you cannot sometimes ask for food, or you just need some simple guidelines. Since our subject in this symposium is also the integration of refugees, immigrants, I think it's important to speak about them. Because the long-term counterpart of culture shock is acculturation or adaptation. And for them, especially refugees, they consider in their psychology that there is maybe no hope of re-entry to their home culture. So communication plays an important role in the adjustments of these individuals in their new home culture. So important communication components that will determine the quality of cross-cultural adaptation include a critical mass of same-culture immigrants to provide community support and mass media, the receptivity of the host culture to non-native populations, and opportunities for immigrants and refugees to participate in interpersonal interactions with host nationals. And I think this is also in a part, considering our context, a challenge to public space and how interactions are in this public space, and of course I think democracy as well and law. And it's important to note all those changes that has happened in societies since all this problem has occurred, and how we must redefine everything since the beginning, because maybe our current system cannot take into account all this cultural baggage. Because as we know, culture is like an iceberg. We only see a tip of it, and inside you have a huge, say, treasure, or something that might enrich a system or a society where a person lives in. But at the same time, it's hard to achieve it, knowing that there is a lot of limits that we encounter in our world. And that's a pity, because one can really develop itself if they have the right components to engage with people from different ideas, and who have different ideas, because ideas is the engine of the world, and if you cannot share them, or if you cannot enhance them and develop them, then you are bound to not advance. So communication is, like we said, is the key component. So the goal of communication for adaptation is the establishment of integrated bicultural or multicultural identity. So let's speak a little bit about obstacles to communication. I think it's easy to know them. So you have sometimes difference, strangeness, sometimes disturbs and destroys communication. In front of these disruptions, a person might create unconsciously a series of mechanisms that will be an obstacle to communication. So one of them is ethnocentrism, which is definitely one of the worst things you can do as a human being, in my opinion, but I feel I had to share that. So like thinking one's own group way are superiors to others, or judging other groups as inferior to one's own. That's definitely the worst thing you can do if you want to achieve a sort of communication with for a person from a different culture. So ethnic refers, of course, to a cultural heritage, and centrism refers to the central starting point. So ethnocentrism basically refers to judging other groups from our own cultural point of view. You have also categorization, stereotypes, prejudice, that gets people trapped in this social representation that doesn't show really the true face of the individual. So how to face these obstacles? We can, like I spoke in my introduction, we can introduce, for example, things like new laws. We can enhance the public space. We can make it much more open for a lot of people. However, we must know that this is a human feeling that is hard to determine and to control. So maybe one of the solutions to this is to concentrate a little bit on our human feelings and the feeling of empathy and respect. And it's important to find the right components to develop this in a sane and healthy society. And it's important then to take knowledge of the attitude we put in place when facing different culture. Are we tolerant enough? Are we being open-minded enough? Or are we just getting ourselves into this prejudice that will not help us advance in our own thinking? Or should we just think our culture and identity is the only one and it's not a relative one? And should we not take into account that some people might function in a different way than us, but sometimes for the same goal? So establishing intercultural communication skills is one of the things I think should be developed. It's not currently it's not developed enough in maybe education, especially in like on a inferior level, like in primary school or in high school. We must understand that we must decentralize ourselves from seeing its different reality, and we have to be ready to change our views from when we are talking to a person or we interacting with them. We have to also try to seek answers and to take our uncertainties as a strength, because we know what we don't know, and then we have to make it a strength to get to this, let's say, a truth that we're trying to acquire from a person. But most of all, I think it's the feeling of respect, and that comes from feeling equality, that you're sitting with a person that is not inferior. So everything, like any sort of solution is mainly a solution that comes from the human mind, the feeling of empathy, and etc. And maybe there is not enough empathy in our world. We might sound idealists when we're saying this, but I think one also has to be idealist when is facing reality. Just to speak in conclusion about intercultural communication, I would say that today a new form of communication is necessary. It should check itself away from the temptation of merging, tolerating, and joining together different cultural realities. Intercultural communication today moves toward the horizon much more complex, which offers a new interpretation. In fact, it is necessary to promote cultural coordination and cooperation. If it is true that from an encounter between cultures and different individuals may create conflicts and misunderstandings, it is also realistic that a communication which takes into account the perspective of others is able to build a new social space, a shared context. Such perspective is opposed to the idea of coherence. On the other hand, it is aimed at overcoming contradictions through acceptance of conflicts between cultural forms, proposing in this way a new form of management. In fact, it is necessary to transform conflicts. I'm sorry, there's a problem here. Yeah, to create conflicts between cultural forms, proposing in it, let's transform conflicts into, I'm sorry for being lost. I cannot read in this light. On the other hand, it's aimed at overcoming contradiction through acceptance of conflicts between cultural forms, proposing in this way a new form of management. In fact, it is necessary to transform conflicts into comparisons. Comparisons should not be evaluative, otherwise we risk creating an ethnocentrism based on difference in value between the best and the worst forms of culture. We should avoid statements of what could be considered fair or unfair, true or false, right and wrong. The new approach asks to pay attention to communication performance. The intent is to grow them and not to put them in opposition. In this context, the idea of respect is particularly significant. Respect is an active suspension of cultural form of assessment. After such learning, the new cultural form created by the encounter between different backgrounds is no longer evaluated in negative term, as it becomes a new source of shared meaning. Respect is a closer look, participatory and empathic. It determines the construction of concepts, a disposition to suspend evaluation, and to activate a communication process aimed at learning and then at mutual understanding. Thank you.
Thank you, Hamza, for your interesting presentation. I would like now to open the dialogue with the audience. If you have any questions or commentaries, please raise your hand and
I still have a lot of questions in my mind as well, to say the truth.
Thank you for this presentation, Fawzi Rihan again. It's not an easy topic, and you've been really brave up there trying to discuss these issues. But I found your presentation a little bit defensive because you mostly relied on respect, on sort of subjective dimensions. I think it was Churchill who once said that between nations there is no such a thing as friendship, there are shared common interests.
Yeah.
And I think if you take your presentation a little bit step sort of further and try to basically bypass the sort of let's call it some of the value system which has to do with prejudice and focus more on what is the value addition that each individual can bring to the other. We have, various examples. I lived a little bit in the US and I've seen how so many peoples from different nations, from Asia, from Latin America, etc. When they come, there's always, the prejudice will be there, but where you can break the barrier is in terms of what you can bring to the others. So if the other feels that you are bringing something that is making me richer, whether you're a soccer player, you can be from any part of the world and you can bring value to the team, you are respected for what you bring in. If you're a scientist, if you're whatever, pianist, okay? So I think, I will agree with you. There's some of these prejudices, but I think it's important, particularly newcomers, the new people. This is Germany. I'm not from Germany. I'm from Tunisia. It's an Arab Muslim country. What is important for newcomers in this country is to, number one, understand what is Germany? What does it mean to be German? What culture does this country bring, okay? And then I'm sorry if I'm being a little bit long here. And I think it's the challenge is not from the German side. The challenge is more from those who are coming new. And of course, the other most difficult challenge for me, I'm tackling with this not from a personal point of view, but more from an intellectual point of view. What can the new people, the newcomers, the new Germans, can bring to this country? It is, after all, a very important economy in the European context and the global context. What can we bring to this Germany? And I think once you deal at that level, you perhaps have a better chance to, I don't like the notion of integrate, but I like somebody said that, the new Germans. Then you are a new German, not because of your color, or that will remain, or the language, but because you're a new German. And that German is bringing something new to Germany, something that is value-adding. So I think breaking the iceberg is not so much about respect me. I have to respect you if you bring something that is of value to me. Mm-hmm. I don't know whether the point is
No,
right.
I completely agree. I'm from Morocco, you're from Tunisia, we know each other. We have something I think you know it as well. When you come to my home, I will give you everything you need, but you will have to know also how you have to behave in my place, and that's your job. And of course, I think that's a normal thing to do. When someone checks you in, you're not, please respect me, please don't judge me, say I'm tourist. No, I have to do a lot of job. I have to advance as well. I have worked with some refugees, and I have seen some very brave children who didn't study for a long time. They're here without any education or school, but they're teaching themselves German. And I think this is basically the point, that the fact that it goes both ways. Because we're not talking about just immigrants or refugees, we're talking about human beings. And it's important, as you said, to put a big effort for these people to integrate and to know what is German, for example. But not just about being German, I think it's also important to, maybe I say this because I see it this way, but I think it's important to also see yourself as a human being who wants to take something and give something back. But the problem is that giving something back is always an issue, because it depends on how you see things as well. This is my problematic that I'm still stuck in my mind for the moment. But I really thank you for your remark, and I think you're absolutely right. There's Julie there, who wants.
Okay, so I agree with both of your point of views, but I also think one aspect that's very necessary in both cases is that people have to have open minds. So I'm not sure which one would come first. Would you bring what you have on the table first and then open up minds that way? Or should people be more open to what you can bring to the table?
I think it's both, but I didn't listen carefully to what you say in the beginning. But I think, because I got the last part, but I think it's the opposite in the end. Or I'm sorry, I didn't listen to it very well. I think you should be always be open-minded to what they bring to you, especially in the case of the refugee crisis that exists, say Germany. I think it's important to the people who come in here are, I think, conscious about what is like playing right now. Is the factor that we are coming to a society that needs to accept us, and we need to take what they give us and to understand what they want to make of all of this. And I think open-mindedness should come first. And because open-mindedness, I think, helps you to take yourself out of the subjectiveness that is so problematic in the end, and make you more objective, make you more ready to have things that might bother you, to move you and bother you in your mind, and you keep thinking about it, and until you get at some point when you understand things, and just understand the phenomenon, not just say if this is wrong or right, or just to understand it. So I think open-mindedness comes first. But this is, of course, what I would do, or what I believe in.
Is there any other question?
Here. Sorry.
Thank you, Hamza, for your interesting presentation. As we know each other, we have been discussing about it, but today you brought something new that interested me significantly. That is the psychology behind someone who is a refugee or a migrant, and that it's in somewhere else outside his or her home place, trying to learn the things of this new home place, but at the same time thinking that someday this person can go back home once more, because, for instance, we have like political refugees here that if I'm not wrong, if the politician who is like in their countries goes down, they need to come back. So how do you think that it should be this integration education with someone who doesn't belong to one place, but it is in this place, and in the future can goes back to the place? And do you have an opinion to say about it? Because
course, yeah. If I had the answer, I think I would have given to them and the problem would be solved. But I don't have it, unfortunately. But yeah, I think it's a very delicate situation, because one person is lost in his mind and confused, it doesn't know what you're going to do. But I think it's important to anticipate things. If a person is here and is here, let's say, for an undetermined time, it's important to start your integration process. Not of thinking of, yeah, I have to integrate because I'm going to be here, but maybe it's here the point of open-mindedness is say, hey, maybe I'm lucky enough to be in a new society, to learn about a new form of a system, to share new ideas and information, and it's a two-way exchange. For education, it's really hard to give that because I'm not an expert, but if my opinion should be that like I've seen children working tirelessly to learn German, but they do not have the chance to be in German classes. So maybe it's also up to from people from Germany also to search for these people who say how are they are refugees and maybe they're here for a long period of time and we should teach them a little bit German and help them. So of course it's a two-way exchange. But if you see like the political situation, for example, let's say Syria, in my opinion, for example, is that it will be hard for Syria to be the country that it was, even in 20, 30 years. It's not something that comes back so easy, even if the political power goes to another hand, you still have the transition and you have to consolidate the institutions. And this takes a lot of time. So if in this context, especially of refugees of war, I think it's who in the mind are confused, I think it's important to choose the right path. That is one in front of you, which is to start integrating fully into society and to make sure it becomes a two-way exchange, not just a one-way exchange, and to make sure that you need to advance in your ideas and the informations you have and to share them and to take them so we can at least start learning yourself and the place you have to take in this new society. But it is such a complex thing to do because you cannot easily do this to millions of people, thousands of people. So you need also a political sit down between all people who want to solve this problem. So let's say Europe. For example, Europe is still lost, in my opinion, on what to do about refugees, and this also impacts their integration. So it's important to see the problem not just in a to see it in a specific way, but always to relate it to, I think, to the general problematic that exists.
Thank you, Hamza.
Thank you.
And I ask you to please join me for a last applause to our guest, Hamza Mjahed.